Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. I'm sure, as everybody's aware out there, there is a presidential race currently taking place, and it's more than just Republicans and Democrats. There's also the Libertarian Party is getting ready to choose their candidate. So today I decided to have one of them on. He is a political activist, sales account executive, and an HR representative. He was the Georgia Libertarian Party's candidate for Senate in 2022. And as I already stated, he is now seeking the party's nomination for president. Chase Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about the campaign and about how we can spread the message of liberty in 2024 and have a real impact.
Awesome. So you weren't always a libertarian, right? What were your political leanings before becoming a libertarian, and what brought you to the party?
Yeah. So what initially brought me into politics altogether was being anti-war. Post 9/11. I was kind of I would kind of casually watch politics before then, but after 9/11 and the war on terror started, the war in Iraq, I started seeing people I went to school with going to fight these wars that I thought were, based on lying intelligence and kind of BS narratives. And so that kind of got me activated. And I didn't know about the Libertarian Party. And so because George Bush was the Republican president, I just kind of became a Democrat. I just kind of fell into there even though I really love guns. I've always been somebody who has liked low taxes and the free market system. But because they were kind of rallying against the wars, that's where I fell into. And it was only after we elected Barack Obama president and the war machine continued and the anti-war movement didn't, from the Democratic Party, that I realized it was more of an anti-Bush movement than an anti-war movement. And so I left the Democratic Party and looked for a political home elsewhere and found the Libertarian Party in 2010.
Now, you said anti-war. Are you anti-war under all circumstances?
I am opposed to using our military to fight offensive wars. Our military should be to defend ourselves from invasion. And that's how you are like the best neighbor, right? It's the same policy I take with my firearm, right? Like I believe in the right of everybody to own a gun for self-defense. I have my gun, it's in my home, and it will only be used if someone tries to attack my area, my, what is mine, me and my family, my property, right? And that should be our policy with our military. We can have an extremely powerful military, one that's extremely ready to take on any force that could attack us. But that's what it should be for if someone attacks us, not for us to attack others. And I think that's the philosophy we should be taking with regards to our foreign policy, especially if we're the preeminent economic superpower. We should be displaying the best of our values, which is peaceful, free exchange of ideas and goods, and not do that at the barrel of a gun. And I think for too long we've been stuck in this have to be the world's policeman mindset. And that's just old school 20th century thinking. We're in 2023 now. It's part of the reason why we need younger people to run for president, because we're not in that Cold War mindset. We're in that post war on terror mindset.
When during the recent libertarian debate that took place at the Connecticut Libertarian Convention, which is where I met you,
Hmm.
you asked the audience two questions. You said, how many people in the audience have read Liberalism by Ludwig von Mises? And I think three hands went up. And then you asked, how many people here have seen Star Wars? And almost everybody in the room raised their hand. Why did you ask that question?
Well, it's because I was trying to demonstrate that sometimes our ability to export our values and our principles doesn't have to come at the hand of a giant economic tome, like, a big book. Sometimes these ideas can actually be put through the pop culture lens, and it just translates way better. More people pay attention to art and culture in that way than they do just like academic works. And I think that's really in any field, right? Like you can really take your pick of anything. I just happen to use politics as the example. And I think, we can look to pieces of art and pop culture as a way to describe our philosophy and to point to our point of view. And, the thing is that, liberalism is a great book. It is a wonderful book if you're somebody who's going to take the time to read it. But Star Wars is a story about a ragtag group of freedom fighters who fights back against an oppressive, authoritarian, fascist government. And that's, essentially the lesson of like classical liberal and libertarian values right there in a piece of art that I think most people can access and understand. And so, and I think I might have said this later in the day. When somebody asked me like, what's a book I can give my kid to make them into a libertarian, I answered the Hunger Games novels, because the main character ends up rejecting both fascism and communism in favor of individuality. She realizes over 3 books that individual liberty and individual rights should trump any kind of state. And that's a lesson that I want our kids to learn. And if that's the way we get that idea into them, I think that's a good thing. And we should look to those avenues as a way to like connect our ideas with the general public who have seen these works, read these books, or watched these movies, listen to this music if you've ever listened to Rush, and like connect those ideas to the libertarian philosophy. I think that's something that we've been massively underutilizing as a party and as a movement. And so I would seek to try to change that.
You actually said in answer to my question during that debate, I asked what libertarian thinkers have had the greatest impact on you. And you gave the answer, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, right? The creators of South Park. Why did you answer that way?
Well, because honestly, they are the first libertarian thinkers I ever came into contact with, even way back in middle school, right? Because they were talking about like there was nothing that was taboo to them. They could talk about anything, and they used the power of free speech and free expression in a way to kind of expand the bounds of creative comedy on television. So much so that they even got away with calling their movie Bigger, Longer, and Uncut before the censors realized what that was really about, right? And so they've always been people who have like flirted on the edge of acceptable speech and acceptable expression. And I find that to be really refreshing. And if you kind of what made me a free speech rebel, man, like I believe you should be able to say whatever you want to say, so long as you do it peacefully and really, there should be no one who's totally out of like the target zone of mockery or satire. I think if we take ourselves too seriously, that in itself is something that deserves to be satirized. And so when I was asked the question, I knew people were going to answer questions like Rothbard and Milton Friedman and Mises and some other great thinkers, which I respect them too. But if you're asking me like who's the first great libertarians who like really hooked me into the idea that you can be who you want to be and say what you want to say, that'd be Trey Parker and Matt Stone.
I love that answer that you gave during the debate. I love that question you asked. In talking to you afterwards and learning about your preferences for how to reach people, I thought was wonderful. I think going through pop culture is a very creative idea. I do think there's a downside though, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. There's out there what I call, I shouldn't what's called, I've called them pop culture libertarians. Now, in the last few days, let me just say, okay, so at the Libertarian Convention in Connecticut,
Mhm.
a woman spoke called Josie, the redheaded libertarian, and another guy, Clint Russell, spoke. Since then, I've been following them on Twitter because I saw them there, and they're what I would designate pop culture libertarians. Now, during their speeches, Josie referred to immigrants, the illegal immigrants, as invaders. Clint Russell touted COVID stuff about how the virus was created and released, so conspiracy stuff. Following them on Twitter now, Josie praises Alex Jones, refers to Alex Jones and Elon Musk as freedom fighters. Clint Russell praised Alex Jones as well. Josie today posted something about I don't know if you saw this gay couple that adopted 2 kids. I think it was in England through in vitro fertilization. And she posted a headline that said 10 children were created and cast aside so that these two, in order to have these 2 kids. So I said, that sounds crazy. I went and read the article. It was 10 embryos. So she's consistently referring to embryos as babies and children. Now, my thing is this: for a libertarian to be that pro or that against abortion, that you're referring to embryos as children and babies, which is inaccurate. I mean, it's not just a matter of what's my position on abortion or when life begins. Even if you hold, as I do, that an embryo is a life form, it's not a baby. It certainly isn't a child. And to refer to immigrants as invaders, to tout Alex Jones, these things are not traditional libertarian positions. My
Well, they're not.
feet,
I'll stop you right there. They're not my libertarian positions.
yes, but
Okay.
yeah,
I just want to. I think we need to be really frank with that. Like, I would reject a lot of that rhetoric.
I would
Uh,
too immediately. And that's why I used to call myself a libertarian for more than 20 years. My views haven't changed at all, but I've dropped the label because I don't care to be associated with people like that in anybody's mind. And my fear is, and this is what I want to get your take on the sort of pop culture stuff and what the risks are, is that when you have people calling themselves libertarians that are touting this kind of message, if I'm a newbie, if I'm just coming into the political arena as you were when you left the Democrats and you're trying to find the new party, had that been the message that came at you, calling itself a libertarian, my guess is you would have walked away.
Yeah, well, this is one of the reasons why, I think we need to be running a campaign that's rooted in the libertarian principles of the party. We have always led the way on immigration. We've always said that immigrants have the exact same human rights as anybody, whether they cross the border using a state sanctioned method, or they happen to just peacefully cross the border. I happen to believe that the reason why so many people sidestep the process is because it's so costly, complicated, and
Sure.
confusing. And if we could simplify that, you wouldn't have anybody quote unquote invading. Nobody's invading. They're coming here to work, just like most people did. I just recently went to Ellis Island in New York, where the Statue of Liberty is, right? Millions of immigrants from across the country or from across the world came in through that room, the registry room. 40% of Americans today can trace their ancestry, at least one of their ancestors, back through that room in Ellis Island. We are a nation comprised of immigrants. So the idea that immigrants are somehow bad for the United States, detrimental to the American way of life or to our culture, it's the exact opposite. Immigrants have always been a plus to the United States. They've always built up our culture. They've helped define what it means to be an American because we're the only nation that is immigrants. And, I'm not one to really love Ronald Reagan. I don't really quote Ronald Reagan often, but I do think one of the best things he ever said was, you can go and live in Japan and work in Japan, but you'll never be Japanese. You can go and live and work in France, but you'll never be a Frenchman. But anybody can come to America and work hard and become an American. And that's what separates us. That's what makes us different. That's the thing that separates us from the rest of the world when it comes to the idea of freedom and liberty. Excuse me. And so I will defend that absolutely as a candidate. And, the libertarian candidate for president is going to be the loudest bullhorn we have. And with regards to this in vitro fertilization, I would remind anybody who thinks like it's a bunch of lies being cast aside, those embryos wouldn't exist and be frozen had it not been for the in vitro fertilization. No new life is being lost. It's not like someone was pregnant, they removed the embryo and tossed it aside. These were embryos that were in vitro fertilized through the miracle of science, which many women aren't able to even have children, are now able to have their own biological children using a surrogate mother to be able to have a child that is both biologically related to the mother and the father. This is a great thing. It allows many people who want to become parents, who want, who want to see, children and grandchildren in their lives, the ability to do that. I am a gay person. I'm never going to be able to, I'm not going to naturally have children with a female partner. But I do have a friend who wants to be my surrogate if I ever get into a position where I'm ready to be a parent. And that means, for me, that means being in a committed relationship, financially able to do this. I don't know if I'll ever be there, right? But I'm going to make sure if I ever am, that I have somebody who's there to help me have a child one day. I don't think that that's a terrible thing. And in fact, I think families come in all different shapes and sizes. And if we're going to defend families, which is one of the things that is central to my campaign, is that families know each other far better than some centrally planned government in Washington, D.C. So the power to determine education choices, medical choices, any choices should be resting in individuals and for young people and the advocacy of their parents who have unconditional love for them, whether that's a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. Sometimes it's a brother or sister having to raise a younger sibling because they don't have a parent there that's able to do that, right? The love is always there. That's the most important thing. That's what we need to be standing up for, is the love that people have for the next generation, that they want to see them succeed. And that's who we need to be supporting. And so this idea, and it's really recently come because a few conservative commentators who are gay have announced that they're having children using surrogacy. And all of a sudden, the right is up in arms about this. The right used to be the party of quote unquote family values. Well, if you're standing up for family values, it needs to be all families and the values that they stand for, not the values you stand for. Because that's what family values means. It means allowing each and every family out there to live in their own individual way so long as it's peaceful and not abusive, harmful, or neglectful in the case of children, of which we have plenty of laws that oversee those things. And we don't need to complicate it further with more bureaucracy. If anything, we need to streamline some of these processes so we quit having kids falling through the cracks of neglect and abuse that currently do exist. And we're seeing it right here in Georgia, where DFACS has taken away these two kids who their parents are peaceful. They claim that there's abuse, but it's really a genetic condition that is causing this child to have hairline fractures. in her bones. Spike Cohen is working heavily on this stuff.
I
So like
saw that on Twitter.
there's
Yeah.
there's kind of issues out there that really do require our attention. But fighting surrogacy and the ability to start families, that shouldn't be something that I seek to fight. Like certainly not as a candidate for president. If you want to do that in your own personal life, I guess you can have your own personal opinions, but it shouldn't be the role of a political party, certainly.
I loved your answer because it was authentic and passionate. And as you were talking, something occurred to me. When you said families come, in all different types. My girlfriend's a single mother of a 4-year-old, almost 5-year-old autistic boy. He's not severe, but he's autistic. Great kid. I love him. I'm an ex-convict. I did 25 years in prison. I've been out of jail a little over a year, and we're getting ready to have our first real place together. We're not the typical American family either. And if somebody were to come and talk to us about how we're not a real family, or you're not a traditional family or something, that would just be ridiculous. And I don't know, you just made that occur to me right now, that sometimes it's obvious. Like if you see two guys and they're a couple and they're adopting a kid, that might be different, vastly different from what we've seen, so it draws the attention. But most families, I think, probably don't fit that mold of the Cleavers from from Leave It to Beaver. So I think that's a very important point you made, and I agree that politics has no place in that stuff.
Well, let's put it through a pop culture lens, right? Like I said, I like to use pop culture lens. Two of the greatest superheroes in the history of comic books come from non-traditional families. First off, you have Superman, the quintessential superhero. He's an immigrant and he's an adopted child. His parents are not his natural parents, they're his adopted parents, but they love him regardless. They would do anything for him. I mean, you even see in the latest, like the Man of Steel movie, the father dies in order to keep Clark's secret, so that way nobody will attack him for being who he is, right? And so that's that unconditional love. And then the next one, Spider-Man, probably the most famous Marvel superhero of all time. He's raised by his aunt and his uncle because his parents have died. A non-traditional family indeed, but Aunt May and Uncle Ben loved him like their own child. And so, if you just look at pop culture and the art of America that comes out of America, and those are both what I would call quintessentially Americana forms of artwork, right? I have a spot, you can see the spider, there's a Spider-Man thing behind me right there. Um, but those are both quintessentially American pieces of artwork, and they reflect the American family, which many times is non-traditional, and that's okay. And that's the thing about it, is like that's the lesson that those both tell you, is that it's okay to come from a non-traditional family. You still have love, and we can still respect that your family is a family and is that unit. And that's what we as libertarians need to be standing up for, is each and every individual and your community and your family. Your family is like the most local community you have out there. And if we're talking about localizing, decentralizing, we need to support those parents and those families. And yes, that includes families that might live in a different way than you. So for those of you who may be more conservative, yes, medical freedom for kids and their parents does include gender affirming care. I think up to the point of, I would say, surgery is reserved for adults. But things like, gender affirming care, social transitioning, these things, that should be left to a parent and a doctor to decide, not some central planner. I don't want the governor or the mayor or the city council to be determining some kid's health care. That's for a parent to decide. And it's the same way with vaccines. It's the same way with where you send your kids to school and what kinds of things you want them to learn. Those are all up to parents, and they should be up to parents. But too often government gets in the way. So why are we libertarians not taking the lead and being consistent? That's the thing. We have to have that consistency. And that requires me to understand that there are going to be families out there that are extremely conservative and probably aren't exactly LGBTQ accepting, all the time, and probably live in a completely different way than I do. But so long as they're doing it in peace and not abusing or neglecting anybody, that should be their personal beliefs.
Thanks. So you have, correct me if I'm wrong, because I may get these wrong, but I believe you told me that you have dyslexia and dysgraphia. Am I saying those right?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, dyslexia, I think most people have an idea, but maybe a wrong idea. I never heard of dysgraphia till I talked to you. What are they?
So dyslexia is when your brain is reading, it processes words differently. It will flip words around or insert words. It's kind of it is a learning, it's a learning challenge that a lot of people have. And a lot of people are actually undiagnosed with it. And then dysgraphia is the same, but except it's when you're writing. So if you're physically writing, you will flip words around if you're not paying, you have to kind of pay extra close attention to this because if you just start writing without thinking, sometimes sentences will come out looking very mixed up. And so that was a learning challenge I had when I was younger, that I've had to overcome. And so it's something that, makes me like throw my heart out to anybody that's ever had a learning difficulty because oftentimes, like I said, these things are misdiagnosed and kids are seen as like, oh, well, they're uncooperative or they just don't want to, they don't want to learn or they don't want to do their homework. But if like writing is literally like an excruciating task for you, maybe that's why, right? And so it's something that I've always thought about, but it's a challenge that it's why always been more of an auditory learner. I prefer audiobooks to reading a book because it's way easier for me to process information by just listening to it as opposed to reading it and then having to be like so very deliberate. And so, but I mean, I can read, obviously, like, right. I read every day. But it's something that I've always preferred to be an auditory learner. And sometimes kids learn better that way. So this is another reason why I support having multiple choices in education, because there are some classrooms where kids are going to learn better using that visual learning, being able to see, read the story on the chalkboard or in a book. And there are other kids who are going to be primary auditory learners who need to do oral learning with a teacher, speaking back and forth to a teacher and doing auditory lessons. And that's always been the way that I have always preferred to learn and preferred, I'm always prefer conversation to writing things down.
As I mentioned, my girlfriend's little son, and I love him. He's autistic. And when I see the success that you've made of yourself, it makes me glad. It gives me hope for him that if, with hard work, if you're willing to put in the effort and you have the resources and have the family, like you talked about earlier, that are going to help you, a lot of things like that and I don't want to use the word overcome, but you can succeed in spite of them, right? You
Oh
can
yeah,
make a success of yourself.
and the autism spectrum is it is a varied thing, right? Like there's all different degrees of the spectrum. But I have many friends of mine who are extremely successful people who are on the spectrum. One of my best friends who's lived in my house for a long time. He recently moved out not too long ago. He's always been a very bright guy, and he's always just found his niche. And right now, his niche is working in automobiles. He's learning the mechanics of engines and things like that. He's doing great out there. But I have lots of friends who have always been on varying degrees of the spectrum, and sometimes, it is almost like an enhancement. Sometimes, like these people, they find what is like great for them to do, and they become amazing at it, right? And then sometimes, but there's always that every child is different, right? Every
Right.
person is different. And so it's always good for us to remark upon those unique abilities, unique traits that each person has, and be able to let people be the best that they can be. And that's one of the reasons why I preach the message of liberty so much, because it's that idea of freedom, free markets, free exchange, free minds, peaceful exchange that I think makes for the best outcomes, particularly for people who are maybe outside of the norm, people who are on the spectrum, people who think a different way, act a different way, live a different way. It's that individuality that is actually allowed to flourish in a world of liberty, whereas more of a centrally planned, socialistic, top-down kind of governance, it just creates the cracks that those people would fall through if it weren't for the ideas of liberty and free exchange. So that's one of the reasons why I push for it, is so that people who, are just a little outside the norm can live that way and ultimately prosper and be the best person they can possibly be. And many times it involves you to live outside the norm to be the best person you can possibly be. And so I embrace it.
I think most of the people who live the best are outside the norm. Because if you're the norm, you're, average. Who wants to be average, right?
Hey, the great change makers are always people who think a little differently or who find a new way to view the world, for good, for bad, for all. The people who really shape the world are those who are embracing the fact that they are a little bit outside the norm and rolling with it. So, I hope to do that in my life. I don't think anybody's truly normal, by the way. Like I think everybody's an individual. It's just we kind of fall into these collective ideas of normal,
Yeah.
right? And those cultural norms and mores, of course, that are very important to look at. But really, I embrace diversity. I think it's a great thing.
So don't I. So you said earlier that you're more of an audio learner. It's because of the dyslexia. How do you think? you being an audio learner has impacted your preferred method of communication of ideas, like through pop culture and whatnot?
Well, I think a lot of it is just I find the visual medium, like movies, to be always like a better way for me to communicate things. Like I've always been more of a movie guy than a book guy, and I've always loved really, really good music that has some like deeper messaging sometimes. I definitely was that kind of hippie, dippy teenager, even though I liked punk rock, who would like sit down in front of a large speaker and listen to Pink Floyd's The Wall, right? Uh, but for me, I think the idea of being an auditory learner has honestly helped me as a candidate because it allows me. I've always been somebody who prefers conversation, and retail politics is very important when you want to run for office. The ability to have a conversation with people, to be able to listen to what they're saying, let it affect you, and then being able to respond back, right? Um, like far too many of our politicians just kind of listen to a question with like their answer already in mind. You can I call it the Ben Shapiro effect. He does that a lot. Like when he's conversing with somebody, you can tell he's already got what he wants to say and he's just waiting for the other person to stop talking. I don't think that's the best way to have a conversation. So sometimes you have to be a little more deliberate. And I think that's kind of allowed me to do that. And it's something I've always tried to do on the campaign trail. I've met so many awesome people and heard so many amazing stories. It's probably the best thing about running for president is kind of hearing the different stories on the road.
Okay, now for some political positions as a candidate. Uh, I'm going to ask you a couple questions that are particular to libertarians only. I don't really think most Americans are too concerned about them, but I'd just like to know from a freedom perspective. So, where do you stand, for instance, on secession or national divorce?
So I believe I believe the state has the right to do it. Don't think it's probably the best idea right now. And here's why. It's not like we have one state that is a true like libertarian state that would want to separate and like be a libertarian state. At this point, you'd be trading in like Georgia's seceded from the union, right? You would be trading like a tyrannical government based in Washington, D.C. for a tyrannical government that's based in Atlanta, Georgia. Like you're not going to get not much difference there. Though, a state technically has a right to, but I think it's kind of a dumb idea to do at this point. Um, and I say this saying, things could certainly be better, but things could be a hell of a lot worse. Like, I don't want North and South Carolina to be warring with each other over resources, over water. I much rather have a federal court system that can work its way through. There's a lot of for those who are like big on it, they really never get into the details of it
No.
because it's so theoretical at this point that it's just, I mean, and I say this as somebody who, in my state of Georgia, like we have that as part of our platform. I seconded it, adding that to the platform. Somebody put that out there. I said, I'll second that. Because technically, a state does have the right to do that. But I think it's a terrible idea, like as of right now. Maybe conditions will change one day or they'll change my mind. But theoretically, right now, the details are so sticky that, and there'd be a lot of violence and bloodshed.
Yeah.
And I seek to reduce violence. So for me, kind of a dumb idea overall, even though I would support that it's something that someone can do. And I personally support your right to secede from the government as much as possible in terms of living as a free person and reducing the government's impact in your life on a daily basis. But like Georgia, like leaving the union to become like the nation of Georgia, kind of dumb to me, like right now.
Okay. Anarchism versus minarchism.
Yeah, I'm a minarchist. I went on a radio show actually just last week in Little Rock, and the host was pretty libertarian, kind of knew a little about it. So he tried to do the minarchism versus anarchism argument. I don't think there's any reason for us to be arguing right now. Like, we're in such a giant state that is like so far from the minarchist utopia that like we should be working in concert together to chip away as much as possible the state where it exists. And that does include and that would be asking anarchists to jump on board with the idea of electoral politics, which not a lot of them are. But I encourage them to. I encourage them to help us chip away at the state. And when we get to a minarchist utopia, then we can argue with each other, right? Then I can say, no, this is what I want. And they can say, no, we want less. And then we can argue the fine points of that. But I see no reason for us to hate each other. I think there's some great anarchist thinkers out there who challenge me in my minarchism on the regular basis. They keep me sharp, right? And so I think they're a worthy part of our movement. They're a valuable part of our movement. and I welcome them to support me as a candidate for president, even though I myself am a minarchist, because I do respect their contribution. I respect their kind of North Star thinking and their purity thinking. And while theoretically, I might disagree with it or say, theoretically it sounds good, but in put into practice, I don't think it's practical, right? But we'll never get to that point until we get to the minarchist state. So
Mhm.
let's work together in concert with one another, and then we can fight later once we have, at least half of us happy.
Okay, what's your stance on intellectual property?
I do believe that if you create something, it should be yours. I do believe in a certain amount of it. Do I think that the trademarking laws and the copyright laws we have right now might be a little erring too hard on the side of IP? It allows people to like screw over people for like parody in some cases, or like likenesses that aren't necessarily, you know, uh, but overall, I think if you create something, right, like we mentioned Spider-Man earlier, Stanley created Spider-Man. He
Right.
should be able to own, until he died or until he sold it to Disney, you know, he created it and it was his creation. And even after Disney bought it, they paid him royalties for it because it was his original idea that they were making billions of dollars off of. He got a few cents out of every dollar. I don't think that's the worst system to live in, honestly. And I think, if we believe in physical property, which we do, I support the right of physical property 100%. We have to say that an idea that does have intrinsic value and worth should be yours. It's your property. You created it, especially if you've created a whole cloth, right? Um, I support the right of people to create their own ideas and create their own products and have a claim to that, right?
Okay, where do you stand on trade, especially with, say, China?
Yeah, I think we should continue trading with China. We should up our trade with China. We should trade with anybody. Open, full, open, free trade. When we do that, we create more peaceful partners for us. We create more security in the fact that people are less likely to invade us if we're either their consumer or their provider, right, of goods or services. And so that's a good thing for us to be doing. In fact, I think we tear down the walls of authoritarianism and oppression and say like a communist China much more quickly using market actions than any kind of military threats or actions. The Berlin Wall did not fall just because we won a military battle. It fell because we won an economic battle, and because we won, and the people in the Iron Curtain and in East Germany, they wanted American goods and products and the products from the free world. Wrangler jeans did just as much to tear down the Berlin Wall as Ronald Reagan did. And I think that that's something we need to recognize, is that trade itself, free trade around the world and peaceful trade of goods and services, is something that actually will connect ourselves to billions of people and actually show what we mean when we talk about liberty. Because liberty is not just an American value, it's not just a citizen's value. We believe liberty is for all people, and that includes the right of free and equal exchange and free markets. So I would embrace that. And as a candidate for president, I would advocate for that, because that's the way you truly make a peaceful world, is by engaging that peaceful cultural, physical, financial, economical, whatever you want to call it, exchange with other people. It's what allows us to live in peace, and it's something that we should be, pushing for, and not this kind of protectionism. Not just because tariffs don't tax China, they tax Americans, right?
Yeah.
But just because when we put up these walls of protectionism, we create adversaries. We create not just maybe competitors on an economic level, but we create adversaries in the world scale. And I would seek to reduce that. And that includes with China. Keep trading with them.
I'm with you. Okay, taxes. Do you have a tax plan, or are you just going to get rid of all taxes, phase them out? What's your idea?
Well, I would love if I could get elected, right, and if we can make enough of the change in the world to get us to a truly voluntarist system where everything is being voluntarily done. I mean, that's the ideal. But I recognize that that would take more than 4, probably even 8 years could even happen. Like that's a huge transformation. That's like it's monumental levels, like right. That either comes via a long, gradual change or a violent, bloody revolution. And I would prefer the former to the latter. And so recognizing that we're not going to get to that involuntary exchange peacefully very quickly, I would like to see a reduction in taxation and as an impact in our lives altogether. Whether that means removing all subsidies and deductions and just lowering the tax codes overall in terms of the income tax, or doing away with the income tax altogether in exchange for say a consumption tax, the fair tax. I think both of those are better than what we currently have. And so if I'm president, whatever we get as close as possible to no taxation is the best path to get on. And I do believe that consumption taxation, being taxed on when you consume, when you spend, rather than what you earn, is a better way to do it. Then still not perfect, right? You're still being removed. Your productivity, your money is still being taken out of the market to fund a state that itself is not going to be very productive nor efficient based on just the very nature of a state. Um, uh, and so, yeah, taxation is theft. I would seek to remove it altogether if I could wave a magic wand. But since I don't have a magic wand handy, I would seek to do whatever I could, working in concert with our legislature and our other and any other apparatus in government to reduce the impact of taxation on the lives of each and every person. Yeah,
Okay, the war on drugs. Would you
it's a
end it?
failure.
It is. So do you decriminalize? Do you just legalize everything? You can go buy heroin at the local store if they want to sell it. How do you do it? What's your position
So
there?
I am definitely a supporter of decriminalization across the board. And here's why. We've seen it actually work in real time in in a scenario where the nation of Portugal, they're a Western European nation, and they had in the 1990s the highest rate of HIV and hepatitis because they had the highest IV drug use rate. It was a massive, massive problem there. And they decided they could either go the way the United States had, this just say no, zero tolerance crackdown policy, which throws a lot of people in prison. It was not really showing the results that they were promising it was when they started this war on drugs in the 70s, or they could take a different approach, a radical approach. And that's what they did. They decriminalized all drugs. They destigmatized the idea of being an addict so that if you wanted to go seek addiction therapy, you weren't, worried about jail or being stigmatized as an addict. People treated it as a medical condition, being addicted to something. They allowed for the ability to go buy clean needles. They allowed for the ability to test drugs. So you could take your heroin to a pharmacy and pay a pharmacist a fee to test your drug to see if there's fentanyl or anything else in it, right? Fentanyl is the big thing we worry about these days. It's what causes a lot of the overdoses. All of this created a condition where there were less overdoses, more people seeking addiction therapy to get off drugs, and you saw the rates of HIV plummet, the rates of hepatitis plummet. Now, they're still slightly higher than the rest of Western Europe, but that's because, thank God, people with HIV and hepatitis can live longer than they used to. But the rates slowed to like new infections are lower than the rest of Western Europe. Same with IV drug use. And so we've seen in real time what happens when a place that was having a real crisis of heroin in the 90s reversed course by just thinking that this top-down zero tolerance policy doesn't work. And that's what we need to be doing in this country. The reason why people are overdosing on opioids is because those opioids are many times spiked with fentanyl. And where does the opioid addiction start? Many times it's in our medical pharma system when there are things like cannabis that could be used in place of that. It's far less addictive and far less detrimental to our bodies. And so denying patients things like medical cannabis, medical MDMA, psilocybin, and denying addicts the ability to live a life of dignity that allows them to, without condemnation, seek help for what is a legitimate medical crisis, addiction. That's a better world to live in. And I would say that as a presidential candidate, if it's me versus Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, I'm the only candidate that's ever going to be advocating anything like this. Because Donald Trump thinks that people on drugs should be put to death, drug dealers should be put to death. And Joe Biden wrote the very war on drugs policy in the 1990s with the crime bill. These 3 strikes you're out, these mandatory penalties, the stiffer penalties, the disparity between crack and cocaine. These are things that were written into law by Joe Biden when he was a senator. And so he's not the guy who's going to fix the problem either. We need a new generation of thinkers. And I'm ready to be that for the Libertarian Party.
Okay, lastly, education. Should the federal government be involved? Do you abolish the Board of Education? What do you do?
Yeah, I would seek to abolish the Department of Education outright if I were president.
Department of Education. Yeah, I said
Yeah,
board. Department of Education. Yeah.
same difference, but I would seek to eliminate it. It has not really helped us out. The more we've federally invested in education, the further disparities come with test scores with the rest of the world, the further the disparities between rich and poor students. And Choice in education is what's going to fix this. And so while I would eliminate the Department of Education federally, what I would like to see is if they're going to fund anything with taxpayer dollars, I would like to see fund students, not systems. It's what Corey DeAngelis has been championing for years. And it's where really I think the mood of the country is at, especially post-COVID, because so many parents saw how bad the public education system was via the Zoom screen when kids were learning from home. And here's the thing, when you give choice to education, you fund students, not systems. I mean, say you do live in a good public school system. Well, most parents will continue to just fund that because they already have bus routes and buildings and infrastructure and logistics and all that stuff. But if you live in, like, say, where I do in Atlanta, where the public school system in Atlanta was so bad that teachers were, they got busted under RICO charges for cheating on test scores to get more funding because of how bad they were teaching our kids. They had to cheat on the test scores. Well, maybe that's a place parents don't want their kids to go get an education. Maybe they want to have alternatives in that educational marketplace for them to send their kids to. Maybe your kid is a kid who's on the autism spectrum, and you want to find a school that's going to be special, that's going to be able to educate kids who are on the spectrum in a way that public schools just aren't equipped to do these days. Maybe you want to have that option as a parent. Maybe we should provide that option to you. And I think that's a much better message out there than top-down, centrally planned school. By the way, we have choice in education. We do away with all the culture war fights we've been fighting in our schools.
That's true.
If you want to send your kid to the woke school or the not woke school or whatever have you, whatever terminology you want to use, send them there. And then that fight's over with. They can have whatever policy on who gets to participate in what school team, sports team, or who gets to use which bathroom. Like, that's up to each individual school at that point. And it does away with the culture war fights. Again, we just allowed people to live in peace on their own terms, we'd have a lot less strife in the world. And that's part of doing that, is eliminating this federal control over educating our kids. And I think we have to have a presidential candidate who's ready to speak those values. And again, Trump ain't going to do that, and neither is Biden. We need to have an alternative that speaks to the next generation, that's ready to speak about that rhetoric.
All right, Chase, is there any issue you want to discuss that I didn't ask about? Anything important you think we need to cover?
Well, I just want to give you a little bit of the thrust of what my messaging is here for this campaign. Like I said, I got brought into this because I was an anti-war voter. When I got brought into the party, the candidate for governor who was out there campaigning, he asked me, what's my biggest issue? And I said I was anti-war. And he said, welcome home to the Libertarian Party. He didn't ask me if I had read Mises or Hayek or Milton Friedman or whoever. He didn't ask me my opinion on this, that, or the other. He said, you're anti-war. That's a liberty enough position to get you in this tent. You're going to hang out with these other libertarians. You're going to get more libertarian. And that's what allowed me to go from being like a quote unquote pro-gun Democrat, right, to being a radical minarchist libertarian who's trying to be the standard bearer for our movement and our party. I was allowed the ability to grow within the movement, and I was comfortable doing that because there were good people that let me grow in the movement. We can't gatekeep the millions of people who are sick and tired of the two-party system, you guys. We have to say, if you think immigrants deserve more rights and deserve to be treated like human beings, welcome home to the Libertarian Party. You think your taxes are too high and get wasted on too many things? Welcome home to the Libertarian Party. You're anti-war, welcome home to the Libertarian Party. You think we need more choices in education or more freedom for how we raise our kids? Welcome home to the Libertarian Party. That's how we grow our movement, to bring millions of new people in, and we'll make them more libertarian as they come in, so long as we have peaceful discourse with one another. That's how we grow our party and we grow our movement. This is the thrust of my message, you guys. I want to see millions of new libertarians, but that's the way we're going to do it. And if you like what you're hearing, you can join my campaign. You can go to votechaseoliver.com and join the campaign from there. Or if you're listening to this on your phone right now, you might be at the gym or taking a walk. Pull out your phone right now and text the word Chase to 21,000. Chase to 21,000 will get you directly connected with this campaign, so we can win this nomination and move forward and have a real alternative in 2024 that voters can feel good about voting for. And just thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to folks a little bit about my values and our positions. And I hope folks enjoyed the podcast and keep listening.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Good luck on the campaign trail. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Remember, let me know your comments. I want to know what you think. Till next time.